Hey everyone, my name's Christy. Welcome to my corner. Thank you all so much for joining me today, this Tuesday, to talk about the history of time. The thing I really love about history is that everything has a history, and time is something that's very interesting. But before we get to that, I want to welcome all my new subscribers. Thank you all so much for joining me for, my, in my little corner of the internet. And to those of you who've been hanging out with me for the past months, it's so great to get to know you here on YouTube in the comments and also on Instagram. If you are not following me on Instagram and you would like to see sort of my progress on my embroidery pieces, baking that I do that I don't film, pictures of my dog, pictures of my life, pictures of my teaching, pictures of history stuff, you can follow me there at Dr_Christy, and I'll put that right here. This is a channel about embroidery and other textile crafts and baking and history and the history of those things. So if that is something that you are interested in, I would love to have you stick around and subscribe. I post floss tube videos on Fridays where I talk about my stitching and my textile crafts. And then Tuesdays are wildcard videos, and that's what today is. So the reason I want to talk about time is because a couple weeks ago was January 1st, which is the new year. And people were making resolutions, and I'm not someone who makes resolutions. And I was watching Leslie from Not Quite Enough Yarn podcast, who also doesn't make resolutions. And she was saying that she doesn't make resolutions because it just feels very arbitrary, right? So like January 1st is very arbitrary. And then I was watching a video by Clutterbug, which is, I'm trying to sort of clean up my life. I love Clutterbug. If you never watched Clutterbug, you should, because she's fantastic. But anyway, she said that a study shows that resolutions, the average resolution ends on January 15th. And January 15th was last week. So I got to thinking, and I commented on Leslie's video that January 1st is actually completely arbitrary. There's nothing special about January 1st. There's no particular reason why January 1st should be the first of the year, should be the beginning of the year. And in fact, having January 1st as the first of the year was like a conscious choice. It was a choice that someone made. And I kind of just want to talk briefly about like the history of the calendar, because in the modern world, most places have a January 1st solar calendar. That's how time is recorded, and that's how we think about time. But of course, that's not everybody does it that way. The January 1st comes from a European colonial hegemony in the world. In about a month, the Chinese will be celebrating Chinese New Year, right? That happens at the end of January and into February. I think it's February 12th this year. And so that's like a different calendar system. The Jewish calendar, the Jewish New Year, is Rosh Hashanah, and that is in September. So, as I said, this was this idea that January 1st is the first of the year is relatively modern. And in fact, in some places it wasn't adopted until the 18th century. In the US, it wasn't adopted until about 40 years before the Revolutionary War. So we're talking like pretty modern, right? It all kind of comes out of the Roman calendar. I guess I just want to take you on a little calendar journey and explain how calendars have evolved since Roman times and into the modern world. And I'm going to focus on Europe because that's what I'm a historian of. But I hope that you enjoy this kind of brief look at the evolution of calendars. The modern US calendar and also European calendar, and at this point kind of the universal kind of global calendar, was essentially decreed by Pope Gregory the 13th in 1582. And in 1582, Catholic countries adopted this new Gregorian calendar, but that was after the Protestant Reformation. And so all Protestant countries maintained their old calendar. And then in the rest of the world, they didn't care because they didn't care about what the Pope said anyway. So the Gregorian calendar replaced something called the Julian calendar. And the Julian calendar was put into place by Julius Caesar in 46 BCE. And this replaced the Republican calendar or the Roman calendar. A couple of things that I want to point out that maybe you noticed but didn't really notice. In the early Roman period, in this Republican Roman calendar, the year started in March. And that kind of makes sense because that's when we have an equinox. That's when kind of the world starts waking up. And that's the reason why September is the 9th month, when sept means 7. And October is the 10th month, when oct means 8. And so on, November and December. The reason for that is because the year used to begin in March. There are kind of like legendary pre-Roman calendars that had a 10-month, right? March through December was like the 10-month year. And then the time from December through until March, so that kind of what would now be January and February, was like just winter. Like it wasn't like a month. And then that time was split into 2 months. So one of the issues with calendars is that days are often organized on a lunar calendar, but years are organized on a solar calendar, and these don't mix. And so calendars are often needing to be recalibrated to make these things line up. The Roman calendar was no different. So the Roman calendar had 10 and then later 12 months that had 29 or 30 days, because the lunar schedule is about 29 and a half days. And so these months would add up to 355 days a year. You would have full months and then hollow months. So full months were the longer ones and hollow months were the shorter ones. And so every 2 years, the Romans would add like an extra month into the middle of February. They would like add 22 days, I think, into the middle of February, which was the end of the year. So they would add it to the end of the year. And that's why our leap days are in February, because it was historically the end of the year. Interestingly, the person who was in charge of deciding how long a year was were the Pontifex Maximus, which was the head religious person in Rome. And this was both a religious and a political position. So different pontifexes would basically arbitrarily decide how long the year was based on who was in office in the Roman Republic. And so if they liked the person or were friends with the person, the consul who was in charge, they would make their consulship year longer. And if they didn't like them, they would make it shorter. This didn't go on for very long. It was obviously an abuse of power. And that's one of the reasons why Julius Caesar decided when he was Pontifex Maximus that there needed to be a reform of some kind, because this was getting ridiculous. And so what he decided was that the year should be 365 and a quarter days long. And he instituted a 365-day calendar with a leap day every 4th year. For some unknown reason, I don't know why, I couldn't figure out why, they were doing leap days every 3 years. And so it was really shifting the calendar pretty excessively. And so when Augustus Caesar became emperor later on, he stopped this leap day. He did not include a leap day for about 20 years to make up for the extra leap days that had been added into the calendar. The problem with this, of course, is that the Earth revolves around the sun in 365.2422 days. What that means is that Julius Caesar's calculation added 1 day every century, which in a lifetime isn't a problem. But of course, Julius Caesar was alive 2,000 years ago, and after 20 centuries, that's a lot of extra days. And part of the problem is that the Christian calendar, so Christianity came about in the Roman Empire, became the dominant religion in Europe, and it calculated its important feasts around the vernal equinox, the spring equinox. And the date of the spring equinox is March 21st. So Easter in particular, and I'll talk about the dating of Easter closer to Easter, that may be that video, but the dating of Easter, which is the most important day in the Christian calendar. We think about Christmas as the most important day, but Christmas was not the most important day in the Christian calendar. It was Easter. Easter was the most important day in the Christian calendar. It's a movable feast, and it is calculated based on Passover and based on the vernal equinox. But because of this Julian calendar messing up the dating system, adding all these days, the actual equinox was no longer, by the end of the Middle Ages, was no longer on the 21st. So they were counting it as the 21st, but it was not on the 21st anymore. And so they decided they had to switch it. And that's where Gregory the 13th comes in. So Gregory the 13th reduced the number of days in the year by 0.0075. So in the Gregorian calendar, the year is 365.2425 days a year. And what this means is that you can adjust with a leap day. The rule about leap days, leap years, is that you have a leap day every year that's divisible by 4, except years that are divisible by 100, unless they're also divisible by 400. So what this means is that century years are usually not leap years. They're only leap years if they're divisible by 400. So 1600 was a leap year, 2000 was a leap year. 1900 and 2100, not leap years. So now we have these kind of leap years, but let's go back to different ways to calculate the first of the year. I'm a medieval historian, and my documents are court documents. They were written in the 14th, 15th century. So in my sources, the first day of the year is March 25th. And March 25th is Lady Day. It's the Annunciation. It is when the angel told Mary that she was pregnant with Jesus. So for a very long time, the year began at the conception of Jesus. At other times, it began on December 25th, which of course is the birth of Jesus. And in fact, January 1st is the circumcision of Jesus. In Judaism, the boys were circumcised 8 days inclusively after their birth. And the circumcision was theologically seen as like the first sacrifice of Jesus. It was the first time he had bled, right, when he was circumcised. So we are actually on a circumcisional calendar, which, is kind of interesting. Even in the Julian calendar, which is what they were using in the Middle Ages when, the year started in March, the year started at different dates in different places and for different purposes. When Pope Gregory the 13th decreed this new calendar to kind of adjust the days, as I said, not everybody accepted it, obviously, because the Pope only has jurisdiction over Catholics. This is after the Reformation, and so there are a lot of places that didn't accept it. But eventually they did. Eventually they accepted it, and I think the last holdout was in the mid-18th century. So, by the American Revolution, everyone in Western Europe and in the Americas is using a Gregorian calendar. But the group that is not using a Gregorian calendar and still does not use a Gregorian calendar are Orthodox Christians. So you may not have ever noticed this, but Orthodox Christians don't celebrate Christmas on December 25th. This year, Christmas in the Eastern Orthodox Christianity, Christian tradition, is on January 7th because the Orthodox Christians kept a revised Julian calendar. They kept a Julian calendar. At the moment, the Gregorian calendar and the Julian calendar are about 12 or 13 days out of sync. And so that's why we have this difference. And the same goes for Easter. The same goes for all of these kind of normal feasts. So when you decided to give up your resolution, on average on January 15th, it's okay because January 1st is arbitrary. And if you want, you can make a resolution for March 1st, which is the Roman way of calculating the beginning of the year. You can make a resolution on March 25th, which is the medieval way of doing it. You can make a resolution for February 12th, which is the Chinese New Year. You can make a resolution for September 6th and 7th, which is Rosh Hashanah. You can make your resolutions at any point because it's all really arbitrary. And people made these decisions to start the new year at this time, or it's because of a religious tradition. So don't feel bad about giving up your resolution so early in the year, because in reality, if this was the Roman Republic, it would be the end of the year and you still have time to make a new resolution. So I hope that you enjoyed this little foray into the history of calendars and why we date things the way we do. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have any questions, comments, or corrections, as always, please put them down below. And if you're interested in learning more about how we calculate days as opposed to like months, let me know and I could talk about things like the Ides and the Nones and the Calends. But for now, this video is a bit longer than I anticipated, so I am going to head out. So with all that being said, thank you all so much for watching. Please take care of yourselves and have a good one. Bye.